What happens when a man born to rule the greatest empire on earth decides he is not a man at all, but a god? What happens when he tries to reshape Rome in his own twisted image, turning emperorship into theater and the Colosseum into his private stage? This is not myth. This is the story of Emperor Commodus, the man who believed he was Hercules reborn. It begins in 180 AD. The mighty Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king, is dying in the cold frontier of Vindobona, far from Rome. His son, Commodus, just 18 years old, waits impatiently. Marcus Aurelius was called the last of the 5 good emperors. His rule was marked by wisdom, restraint, and devotion to philosophy. But now, as the old emperor struggles for breath, a dark shadow looms over Rome. For the first time in nearly a century, the throne will not pass to a chosen man of merit. Instead, it will pass to blood, the blood of Commodus. From the moment Marcus dies, the empire changes. Commodus enters Rome not as a cautious young man, but as a performer stepping onto a stage. He parades through the city in golden armor, laurel crown on his head, cheered by the crowds who believe him the heir of greatness. But those who had known Marcus Aurelius whisper among themselves, "His son is not like him. He is vain. He is cruel. He is obsessed with strength, with spectacle, with being admired." At first, Commodus plays the role expected of him. He speaks to the Senate. He promises peace. He pretends to follow his father's path. But behind closed doors, something strange begins to unfold. Commodus surrounds himself not with wise generals and senators, but with flatterers, actors, and gladiators. He trains endlessly with sword and bow, boasting of his skill. He stares into mirrors for hours, admiring the muscles of his body. He tells those closest to him that he is destined to surpass even his father, not as a philosopher, but as a warrior god. Then comes the declaration that shocks Rome. Commodus is the living Hercules. Not the Hercules of dusty myths, but the real one, reborn in flesh. He dons the lion's skin, carries a club, and demands statues of himself be raised across the empire, not as emperor, but as Hercules victor. He even renames months of the calendar after his own titles. Rome is no longer the city of Augustus or Marcus. It is the city of Commodus. The Senate laughs at first. Surely this is youthful arrogance, a phase that will pass. But they soon realize this is no act. Commodus orders them to honor him as Hercules Romanus, the champion of the world. He threatens execution to any who mock his claims. A deep fear spreads through the aristocracy. Yet the Roman people, ordinary citizens, slaves, and soldiers, love him. He gives them bread. He gives them endless games in the Colosseum. And more than that, he joins the games himself. Imagine the shock of Rome when the emperor, dressed as Hercules, steps into the arena. At first, it seems like theater, but then he kills. Commodus slays wild beasts with bow and spear. He faces gladiators, though most are ordered to submit. The people roar with excitement. They had never seen an emperor fight. To them, Commodus is not mad. He is magnificent. But in the shadows, Rome's elite seethe with shame. The emperor who should be commanding armies and ruling the world is now a performer in the sand. Every roar of the crowd reminds the senators of their helplessness. Every beast Commodus slays is another humiliation for the empire's dignity. The turning point comes when Commodus decides that even the Colosseum is not enough. He declares that Rome itself must change. He renames the city, Colonia Lucia Aeneia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. The legions, the empire, the very people are renamed after him. Rome is no longer Rome. It is the personal possession of a man who thinks he is a god. Behind the spectacle lies paranoia. Commodus begins to suspect betrayal everywhere. Senators are executed on charges of treason. Generals are dismissed. Loyal servants are poisoned or strangled on a whim. Blood flows in the palace halls as much as in the arena. And yet, Even his enemies cannot deny his strength. Commodus really is a skilled fighter. He really does seem tireless, as if touched by something beyond human. Whispers spread. Could be true. Could Hercules truly walk again in Rome's streets? But here lies the danger of worshipping yourself as a god. Those who bow to you also dream of killing you. In the smoke-filled chambers of Rome, conspiracies begin to form. Senators, praetorians, even Commodus's lovers. None are safe from suspicion. None are safe from his wrath. And all the while, the games grow bloodier. The emperor's hunger for spectacle has no end. One day, he slaughters 100 lions in a single show. Another day, he kills a giraffe with a single stroke just to hear the crowds cheer. He stages mock battles where he alone emerges victorious. Rome's greatest amphitheater becomes the emperor's private circus. But beneath the roars, beneath the gold, beneath the lion skins and laurel crowns, a question burns. How long can this madness last? How long can an empire survive when its ruler cares more for applause than for power? The answer will come in blood, betrayal, and a conspiracy as twisted as the emperor's mind. Because Commodus believes he is Hercules. But Rome will remind him he is still mortal. The Colosseum was Rome's beating heart. It was where emperors proved their generosity, where generals displayed their triumphs, and where the crowd decided who lived or died with a simple gesture of the thumb. For most rulers, the arena was a tool. For Commodus, it became an obsession. From a moment he declared himself Hercules reborn, the games transformed into his stage. He would descend into the sand, not as an emperor above men, but as a gladiator among them. At first, the senators thought this was mere pageantry. Perhaps Commodus would throw a spear from distance, or play at mock battles for the entertainment of the people. But they were wrong. Commodus was not there to pretend. He was there to fight. And fight he did. Wearing a golden helmet, carrying his club and sword, Commodus strode into the arena like a god of war. His chest glistened in the sun, muscles honed by hours of training. He faced down gladiators brought from every corner of the empire. They were ordered, of course, to submit, to fall at his feet, to let him win. But sometimes, in his vanity, Commodus demanded real combat. He struck fast, brutal, and efficient. He had trained since boyhood, and though he lacked the discipline of a soldier, he had the strength and agility of an athlete. The people roared as their emperor cut his opponents down. But there was something strange in these contests. The gladiators, many of them seasoned killers, seemed hesitant. They allowed him the first strike. They exaggerated their falls. The crowd did not care. To them, Commodus was invincible. To the senators watching from their marble seats, it was humiliating. The empire's leader, heir of Augustus and Trajan, reduced to a sideshow performer, drenched in the blood of slaves. Commodus did not stop at gladiators. He turned his spear against wild beasts, lions, leopards, elephants, even ostriches. He had them chained, crippled, or exhausted before facing them, ensuring his victory. He once shot hundreds of arrows into a herd of animals trapped in the arena. Another time, he decapitated a giraffe with one strike, not because it was a challenge, but because it thrilled the crowd. The more the people cheered, the more his madness grew. He began to charge enormous fees for his appearances. Senators were forced to pay fortunes for the privilege of watching him kill. Some bankrupted themselves to keep favor. Others fumed in silence, their hatred festering like a wound. But Commodus did not care for their anger. He saw only the adoration of the mob. He believed Rome itself was his audience, and he its star. One day, he came into the arena carrying a sword and a bundle of wooden clubs. He announced that each club represented the head of a senator he despised. One by one, he smashed them to splinters, grinning as the crowd laughed. The senators sat frozen in their seats, forced to smile as their emperor mocked their deaths. Fear spread through the Senate. They began to realize Commodus was not just humiliating them, he was threatening them. Anyone who opposed him might find themselves in the arena, forced to fight for their life against the emperor with no chance of survival. But his cruelty was not limited to politicians. Even the elite guard of the empire, the Praetorian prefects, were not safe. The men meant to protect him became his pawns, elevated and executed at his. One prefect, Perennis, fell victim to a conspiracy. Commodus had him dragged before the crowd and executed, accused of plotting against him. Another, Cleander, grew too powerful, selling public offices for bribes. The people rioted against him, and Commodus ordered his death too. With each betrayal, Commodus's paranoia deepened. He trusted no one, not generals, not advisors, not even family. Only one thing remained sacred to him: the games. By the year 190 AD, the emperor was appearing in the Colosseum so often that Rome itself seemed to revolve around his performances. He no longer ruled from the palace. He ruled from the arena. He demanded statues of himself as Hercules, not just in Rome, but across the empire. He renamed the months of the year after his own titles: Lucius, Aelius, Commodus, Hercules, and so on. Even the legions were renamed to carry his glory. Rome itself was no longer Rome. Commodus renamed the capital Colonia Lucia Aeneia Commodiana, the colony of Commodus. Citizens were now called Commodiani. The Senate groaned in silence, but the emperor's word was law. Then came his most shocking command. Commodus announced that he would refound Rome itself on New Year's Day, 193 AD. The city would be rededicated, not to its old gods, not to its founders, but to him, Hercules reborn. The world, he believed, would begin anew under his divine rule. But there was a problem. The emperor's madness had pushed Rome to the edge. The treasury was drained by his endless games. Grain shortages plagued the people. The Senate trembled under his insults and threats. And the Praetorians, those who guarded him, began to question their loyalty. Behind closed doors, whispers of conspiracy grew louder. Advisors plotted. Senators schemed. Even Commodus's lovers and servants wondered how long his reign could continue. Then came a chilling moment. During one of his arena performances, Commodus declared that he would appear in the Colosseum not as Hercules, but as a gladiator emperor. He would fight not just animals, not just prisoners, but men of Rome's highest class. The senators, the aristocrats, perhaps even the generals. It was no longer theater. It was terror. If Commodus lived long enough to refound Rome in his name, everything that had defined the empire for centuries, its traditions, its gods, its dignity, would vanish. Rome would become nothing more than the stage for a madman's fantasies. The conspirators knew they had little time. And so, in the palace's deepest shadows, a deadly plot began to form. Because Commodus was not only playing Hercules, he was playing with fate. And fate was preparing to strike back. The night was heavy with silence. Torches flickered in the palace corridors. Outside, Rome was restless, the city torn between fascination and fear for its emperor. Inside, a group of conspirators gathered. They were senators, generals, and members of the Praetorian Guard, the very men sworn to protect him. And in that dim light, they whispered the unthinkable: the emperor must die. Commodus had crossed every line. He had mocked the Senate. He had drained the empire's wealth. He had turned Rome itself into a stage for his fantasies. And now, with his plan to refound the city in his own name, the conspirators saw no future for Rome but slavery under madness. At the heart of the plot was Marcia, Commodus's mistress. She had once loved him, or at least endured him, but now she saw what he had become. He was unpredictable, cruel, and paranoid. That very morning, She had discovered her own name on a secret list of executions, written in the emperor's hand. Alongside hers were the names of senators and high officials. Commodus intended to kill them all, one by one, starting with the New Year's Day celebration. Marcia had no choice. To survive, she had to strike first. With her were two allies, Laetus, the commander of the Praetorian Guard, and Eclectus, the chamberlain of the palace. They formed a pact. Tonight would be Commodus's last night on Earth. But killing the emperor was not so simple. Commodus was strong, trained, and suspicious. He no longer trusted banquets or public gatherings. His food was tasted. His guards were loyal or terrified into loyalty. The conspirators needed a weapon he would never suspect. Marcia prepared his evening drink, a cup of wine laced with poison. She carried it to him herself, smiling, hiding the storm inside her. Commodus, exhausted after a day of training for yet another arena spectacle, drank deeply. Within minutes, his stomach churned. He staggered, groaning in pain. For a moment, it seemed the poison would finish the task. But Hercules, even in his madness, was hard to kill. Commodus vomited, fighting to purge the poison from his body. His strength was terrifying. He writhed and gasped, but he did not fall. The conspirators panicked. If he lived, they were doomed. They needed to act quickly. Laetus summoned a wrestler, Narcissus, a trusted companion of the emperor. Narcissus had been his sparring partner, a man of great strength, familiar with Commodus's moves. Perhaps that was why Laetus chose him. Or perhaps Narcissus, too, had grown weary of the emperor's arrogance. Dragged into his chamber, Commodus was barely conscious, weakened by poison but still breathing. His eyes opened, dazed, and for a moment he saw betrayal everywhere. He tried to rise, to summon the strength of Hercules one last time. But Narcissus pressed him down. The wrestler wrapped his hands around the emperor's throat. Commodus thrashed, his muscles straining, his face twisted with rage and desperation. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might overpower his killer. But the poison had already stolen his breath, dulled his strength. Narcissus squeezed harder. The emperor, who had imagined himself a god, gasped like a mortal man. His eyes bulged. His lips turned blue. And then silence. On that night of December 31st, 192 AD, the reign of Commodus came to an end. Rome awoke the next morning to whispers. The emperor was dead. For some it was relief. For others it was terror. Who would rule now? Would the city descend into chaos? The Senate acted quickly. They declared Commodus not a god, but an enemy of Rome. His statues were torn down. His name was erased from monuments. The months he had renamed after himself were restored. Even the city, which he had called Commodiana, was given back its true name, Rome. For the senators, this was revenge. At last, the man who had humiliated them was gone. They spat upon his memory, damning him as a tyrant. But the people were divided. To the masses, Commodus had been more than an emperor. He had been a performer, a champion, a gladiator who gave them endless games. They mourned his death, even as the Senate celebrated it. The man they had adored as Hercules was gone, and with him, their endless spectacle. The empire, however, did not celebrate for long. Commodus's death unleashed a storm. With no heir, no plan of succession, Rome fell into crisis. In just 1 year, 193 AD, 5 emperors would rise and fall, each clawing for power. Civil war erupted. Blood flowed not only in the arena, but in the streets and fields of Rome itself. Commodus had died, but his shadow lingered. His reign had shown the fragility of Rome's greatness. A single man, drunk on power and blinded by madness, had shaken the empire to its core. And yet his legend lived on. For centuries, storytellers would whisper of the emperor who thought he was Hercules, the man who fought in the arena, who renamed the very months of the year after himself, who turned Rome into his playground. He was a tyrant, yes, but also a showman, a man who understood the power of spectacle. Some called him insane, others called him bold, but all agreed there was never another emperor quite like Commodus. In the end, he wanted to be remembered as a god. Instead, history remembered him as a warning. Because power, when unchecked, does not turn men into gods. It turns them into monsters.